Michelle,
Daniel,
OG
OG
Rose.
Rose, and we're going to talk about fittedness, which is an interesting term. It gets tied to things like telos or desires or needs or wants. Like, what does it mean to talk about what is fitting for something?
Mm,
And there's something about fittedness that is already kind of oppressive because if I say
mm,
it's fitting that X does Y, well, who are you to say you
yeah,
know enough about X to say what is Y?
yeah.
But then there's also something about saying, like Keller would talk about, many people talk about this, like it is fitting for a boat to be in water. Could a boat be on a road or put in the middle of a field? Sure, but there's something not fitting about it.
Mm,
Now, of course, the question is why? What are we even talking about when we say
mhm,
fittedness, right? And this is also very important because there seems to be some things that are fitting for a human being. It's fitting that humans eat. Why? Because they die. But do they have to eat? No. So there's a way in which it's
yeah.
optional, but there's another way in which it is not. I mean, the first thing, and it's a very interesting question because throughout philosophy, this is obviously pointing toward final cause, telos, which seems to be extremely important. And even people like Dr. Sandler, the great ethic, morality philosopher at Harvard, will talk about how, in order to talk about what's right and wrong, say in the game of golf, you're inevitably going to have to ask what is golf and what is fitting for golf. Like getting
Exactly.
into that court case about the guy using the cart, the golf cart, and how that, the argument. There was a Supreme Court case, it's pretty wild, where a guy wanted to use a golf cart because he was injured, but the other player said no, walking is essential to the game of
Mm,
golf,
mm,
and so if he can use a golf cart, in a way, it's no longer golf. But
mm,
then, so in a way, a golf cart is not fitting for golf, at least at the professional level,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And that gets into where you got to get into like what a thing is to determine what is fitting for it. And really, what Dr. Sandler was getting at is you can't separate ethics and ontology and stuff. It all goes together. Well, so it goes in our own lives.
yeah.
And I guess the first thing that comes to mind, and I'll just throw to you for thoughts. There's something about when you put a boat in a field, what is unique to the boat can't come out. Like anything could be put in a field. I could put a car in a field, I could put a table in a field, and all of them would have, a similar function to a certain degree, right? But there's something about a boat and what a boat is, and we're already kind of alluding to how final, material,
Mhm,
efficient calls, and all of it links. You can't separate any of the causes. One of the great mistakes has been thinking you can separate Aristotle's causes, and we've talked about that with Jockin and Matthew Allison. But there's something about a boat where you don't get the fullness of what a boat can do except when it's in water. So
mhm,
there's something about the limit that is actually unleashing. So that's the first thing I want to say is that there's something about fittedness that is a limit that unleashes.
mhm,
So it's really not a limit. It sounds like a limit
yeah.
when you say a boat can't, it's fitting for a boat to be in
Be
water.
water.
But when it's in water, it unleashes what a boat can do. And that
Yeah.
also just makes me think of Alex Ebert's work on the idea of encountering limits, having a saturation, something opens up. And that's
Mhm.
also Hegel as well. But I'll throw it at you for thoughts.
Yeah, that's all very good. And I was trying to think about how fit because I don't know that I'd really ever heard the concept
Sure.
of fittedness in terms of that specific word. When I was younger, though, I think maybe the idea of what's appropriate
Mm,
would be another kind of way to think about that,
sure.
though it's not the fullness of it. Um, because like, oh, what's fitting for this? Like table manners are a type of fittedness, right? Like you do this, and but even that's kind of funny because table manners in one culture can be
Yeah,
different
they're
than another.
arbitrary in a certain way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the funny thing. I think that's what's so important to always remember before you get kind of like too steeped in a moral righteousness about something. It's certainly fine if you have a certain standard of what it is, but holding a kind of grace, gentleness, and patience in teaching that standard is important because honestly a type of assumption that this is the right way and everybody would be displeased. Well, what if somebody's displeased that you're not
Right.
slurping because in
Yep.
their culture that's how you
That's
show a kind
polite.
of
Right. Right.
appreciation for the
Right.
food or burping? I mean, just I
Yep.
know it sounds outlandish, but
No,
it's true. Like
absolutely.
there are different types of standards. And so though yes, of course, in your own context it's obvious, right? And there's an obvious fittedness. And that's the funny thing. Like there are these, perhaps the social engagements are probably the most fertile for difference because like with a boat in Malaysia is the same as a boat in, Denmark. Is this, you see what I'm
Yep.
saying? There's a kind of connection to its shape and form and what it can do
Hmm.
in certain materials like water or
Yeah.
certain
Yeah.
avenues. So, but there's the social aspects which are way more fertile for again the difference because people have different
Yes.
interpretations.
Yes.
You can't interpret if a boat boat's clearly not moving in the grass, but
Yeah.
it's clearly moving in the water. So
Sure.
like you
Sure.
can kind of assess that universally.
Yeah.
But in the
Yeah. Yeah.
particularities of um how people interpret the hermeneutics, that's where it gets quite challenging. A- and so I'm just trying to say that while there's something there that's interesting, but and I have one more thought, but I'll throw it
No,
back
but
your
this
way.
is
Yeah.
very, very good. So first off, we've spoken at the net. For me, the final calls of a thing, because I think all of this is linked to that kind of topic,
Yeah.
and it gets into things like wants, desires, need, all of
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah.
Like how do you
How you plan
determine
your
what is,
day even.
yeah,
Yeah.
like what is fitting?
Yeah.
There is something about the telos of a thing that is what unleashes it. Weirdly, actually, is the point where it's computate. I've said computational, but it's combinational. I can't ever say these words, so I might say computational for
It's
vacation. But
okay.
this kind of combinational, computational explosiveness occurs,
Mm,
like where the map kind of gives way to the territory.
mm,
And so when you put a boat in the water, all the things you can do with a boat multiplies. There's a certain multiplication of possibility
mm,
that occurs. So to me, that's really important because far from the final end of a thing limiting it, it's the in a bad way, it's the limit that actually kind of explodes its possibility.
mm.
And I think we've gotten into trouble because we think of fittedness as conformity
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
kind of oppression or
Exactly.
whatever, but actually,
Merely what's
yeah,
appropriate in the
merely what's
weather.
appropriate in
Yeah.
a way. But actually, the problem is when I put a boat in a field, there's much less computational explosiveness. It's going to be there. But when I put it in the water, oh, it could go here, it could go there, it could sail. I could do all these other things with it. So there's an explosion of possibility.
Mm,
And the reason why I say that, the question then becomes when we talk about manners or ethics in general, what is it that it's unleashing? Because there's something about
mm.
fittedness that is unleashing something.
Yeah.
Like it's unleashing the fittedness is some kind of meeting conditions of possibility for the fullness of the thing. So the question is, what are we unleashing in the social? Like when we do
Yeah.
table manners, what are we unleashing? What is the
Yeah.
point of the table manners? Because yeah, I mean, this Foucault norms. I mean, norms can be used to oppress. But if you think about it, again, it's just very important. I think it's extremely important to realize that quote unquote norms,
Yeah.
depending on what you mean by that, givens and all of these things, only become oppressive when they cease opening up possibility. But the irony is that you don't, if you have no limits or
Mhm.
no norms, then you actually have less possibility because it's chaos. Like there's a point where possibility becomes chaos, and actually then it's not possibility because you can't, there's not enough stability to realize anything,
Mm.
right? So then the question then becomes, what is it in the social we're trying to unleash?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll throw it to you, but it would seem to be stuff like the mysterious energy we're talking
Mm,
about, the
mhm,
flow of ideas, the ability to converse, the
mhm.
geopadic, like beauty. This is why all of these metaphysical concepts are really
They
important
are.
because otherwise it is not, you have nothing of which you can think of that you're trying to unleash via fittedness. And so then you're going to say, well, fittedness is just oppression, get rid of it, and the social order is gone. Y-
Yeah, or just it's necessary and enforce it at the expense of the
Yes.
other
Yes.
potentialities
Yeah.
of what
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was
Yeah. Yeah.
actually meant to
Yes.
leash, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's all very good. Because I do think there's just to tap on that a little bit more on the fact that it potentially being oppressive is how much are those norms for unleashing beauty, goodness,
Yeah.
truth,
Yeah.
joy,
Yeah. That's right.
enjoyment,
That's
and
right.
how much of it is
Putting
people.
down a revolution, putting down difference or stuff like that.
Well, and also like people just getting annoyed. Like people
Mhm.
are terribly annoyed with one another,
Yes, they are.
and can get terribly annoyed with one another fairly easily. But at the same time, there's if we think about manners, there can be a safety element of it, right? Like if you're eating way too much at the same time, like you're not able to, you could choke, or
Yeah,
like you
there's
might not be able
norms
to
tied to
enjoy
health,
it.
right? Like it's
Well,
health. If you eat too
yeah,
fast, you could die or something.
yeah, or like you may not be able to, enjoy it as much, but obviously the person is quote, inhaling the food because they're enjoying
Enjoying
it
it,
so
right?
much. So it's,
Exactly.
I think that's the other reason why it matters the way we language these things, because for somebody who might already ask questions about stuff, the very like just base answers are not going to
No.
be sufficient enough to convince them. Now maybe you say they shouldn't be convinced, they should just respect that these are the norms. Okay, but we're humans, and
Mhm.
humans are different, and humans will challenge things because maybe that's actually one of their greatest gifts. So it comes across as a great annoyance
Yeah.
because in the process you just would like conformity for the sake of an easeful.
Yeah, but even that move where you say, well, they should just know, in a way, what you're doing is avoiding the speaking or talking to them to avoid the reality of like difference.
Yeah.
So even when you say, well, they should just know, which people do
Or they
all
should
the
just
time.
accept on the
Yes.
on the very base answer, like, well, that's what's manners and that's what's
Yes.
proper and that's
That
what's.
helps you avoid the encounter.
Yeah,
And the encounter is existentially difficult.
it
So
is because it makes you have to think about like
where does
how.
it come from? Yeah, you know, you question your givens and you're destabilized.
Yeah, and you're like, that's dangerous anyway.
Yes.
So we should just make sure that it's, yeah. And again, I understand there's a lot of good intent, and even it the idea of promoting or propagating certain norms or manners. I understand where it's coming from. It's not necessarily a bad thing to even want to do. It's just the fact of when it doesn't, when you are encountering the difference, what do you do then? What do you do then?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and uh yeah, that how is really interesting because how much is it, again, social dynamics, right? You've got different hermeneutics, different interpretations. You have what you know, and then you have what the other person's thinking, what you can't fully know.
Right.
And yet you have to take account for the fact that they don't necessarily think the way you do.
Yes.
And so um yeah, it's interesting, but I do think this idea, just to go back to this idea of what is it unleash, is really important because, but I guess I'm trying to think about this idea where, say we haven't, um, I don't know, thought, like, let me just make it about something. Like if I'm asking for somebody to do X or Y or something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
how much is, we could say, well, that would be maybe complicating it too much to add the element of, oh, I might just be annoyed in there.
Yeah.
Um, which is true. Maybe that makes it feel too complicated, but it is a real factor in
Yes.
the dynamics.
Yes.
So yeah, that's why sort of has to ultimately come down to like something bigger than that, because your
Yes.
annoyance, like, you should actually be the one who's getting over it.
Yeah.
You should
Exactly.
not be allowing
Exactly.
yourself to get so annoyed, right? So then, but if you are able to let that go and realize you're holding up a standard for the sake of beauty, truth, goodness, joy, enjoyment, then I think there maybe is just a less you're less perturbed when, even after demonstrating what needs to be done, or like requiring it, that it isn't necessarily immediately adhered to or upheld. I mean, and it really depends. It's just interesting because I guess I'm thinking about Rumi and the guest house, and like,
Mm.
how in a sense you really, there's a way in which, barring some obvious offenses that you'd say, maybe you're not allowed to be able to stay here. If a person's doing things in their own customs and it's not really the way you do things, you still sort of provide a hospitality.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, but then you
But
think
then the
about,
question is, when do you set up a boundary? Right.
yeah, and then, you think about, like, children are still learning things.
Yeah.
So, and they definitely don't necessarily think the way that we do at, yeah, once you've been kind of acculturated and all that
Hmm.
stuff. So how much is it like of just accepting, but also bringing up the,
Well,
setting, establishing boundaries.
well,
And I do think, though, one more thing really quick, it does seem to be that the mode of teaching, and sorry, this is related to fittedness, though, actually, because what's fitting to educate, right? How you educate is going to be huge, because if in the process of trying to unleash beauty, truth, goodness, joy, and enjoyment, say at a meal, then the way that you would have to be teaching would, if it's counteracting those things, it might be unconvincing for somebody to believe that those things could be in service of those other things.
yeah.
Does
Yeah.
that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yes.
And I also think, like, yes, of course, having polite manners is a good thing, but you also want to think about, like, people aren't just that, and they're a lot more than that, in the sense that, um, like, and people would say, well, you never have to just choose between these things. That's true. However, if you had to pick between somebody having very good manners, but not being, like, not very kind or loving or understanding or gracious, which are you going to choose? Like, which would you actually choose ultimately?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
you could say, well, if they're really gracious and understanding and like a kind person, it would trickle down to their table
Sure.
manners. And
Sure.
yes, they
Sure.
are related. But I just think that, like, there's so many questions, even just in considering the fittedness that is in appropriate behaviors, or manners, politeness, all of these things. And again, there's a lot more subjectivity there, but there's still conditionality, right? There's still truth,
Yes.
and there still
Yes.
is a right way to do
Yes.
things.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
but there's just a lot more that has to get gone into, I think, than people than meets the eye.
Well, I mean, there's an argument that this question might be like at the heart of philosophy, because
Mhm.
ultimately it's the question of, is there something authoritative outside the subject?
Mm.
Because if not, then the social's doomed, or it's chaos because
Mhm.
everyone's in their own relativity. But if you say there is something outside the subject that has authority, then you're risking oppression, right? And so this is a major issue. And also, when you talk about fittedness, yeah, you're talking about everything from, well, desires, wants, needs, metaphysics, everything, and
Yeah.
it all kind of
Votes. Yeah,
votes.
yeah.
Yeah, because if you go, because the question is also, when is a want or desire justified?
Right.
There, when is
Or
it justified?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
fittedness and justification are like two sides of the same
Yes,
coin.
yes.
And if there's no such thing as justification, then it's all arbitrary and it's power then, or
Mhm,
whoever gets isolated and do whatever they want. And there's just, isolated pockets of people who share similar values, but there's no way to bring these different groups together. And then you're
mhm,
going to run into this ever um, multiplication and you get trouble, right? Andrew Luber talks about theme as a kind of authoritative, this capital X variable that brings difference together. Beauty, we talk about all these different things. And there's something about fittedness where the question is kind of tied to how do you identify when something is aligned with maybe Luber's theme or when it's justified, might be the term we use here. When is something justified?
mm,
And then, of course, the question is by what standard? And then the question is by what standard that doesn't oppress or limit.
mm,
And
mm.
and please.
But then also the limit can be the opening for the
But
saturation.
but but then it really matters what limit we're talking about
Yeah,
because not
yeah,
all limits equally afford creativity. And
absolutely.
we were speaking about that with Luber and Joachim with the roots
Right,
and
root and
rhizome
rhizome.
because all of this is also pointing to the roots and
Yeah.
rhizome conversation. Now it should be noted, even with the table manners, Owen and the Agon was talking about the German sociologist. That name escapes me until this evening at 2 a.m. On the idea that when a lot of table manners was actually enforced by the scholarly class so they could get dominance over the warrior class because for example it used to be you would bring out the meat and carve it up in front of everyone and that then became very rude and something that wasn't very polite to carve the meat in front of people, but that happened to benefit the scholar class because they couldn't cut up the meat in front of everyone, right? So then if you
Mhm,
make impolite all of the stuff that the warrior class does,
mhm,
then you're ultimately that's actually a power move for the
mhm,
scholar class to go up too,
mhm,
right? And things like table mount, you can get into Bourdieu's distinctions, where the fancy uses of the silverware is a way to signal to people that you're aristocracy and they are not. So these things can be used for power. But then it also seems really problematic to say, well, then forget table manners
mhm,
because there's something chaotic and problematic about that, right? So what well, ultimately, also, the problem is if you've just got the good, then you can't have this conversation. Because what is good, when people say it's good to do this, good to that, it's power. Jock, and we've talked about this a million times. So all what has to be unleashed is something for the beautiful.
mhm,
It has to be for the beautiful. And then the question is, what is the beautiful in a certain way? What would be a sign of the beautiful. Now, I want to say creativity, like a multiplicity of possibility
mhm,
that opens up. And the argument would be so this ultimately, and this becomes very, very practical in certain ways, and I'll throw it to you. Like, are there more possibilities for relationship? And then the argument would be relationship itself is pregnant with possibility. Like when you relate to it, so there's a few moves that have to be made. Human beings are infinitely generative. Like, and they're mysterious as well. They're unknown. Like when I talk to you, I don't know anything could happen in this conversation. Anything could come up. So there's an argument to be made that you can never get as much creativity from people relating. When people relate, there is more creative possibility than when a human relates to, say, an object because of the unknown, because of the depths that a human has, right? There is perhaps infinite things a human being can do with a rock, but the infinite things that a human can do with another human being is a greater infinity than what they can do with a rock, perhaps, right? So there's something about humans, human relationality that affords more creative and surprising possibility than not. So then the question is because then the argument that we're pointing to is it would seem as if the only limit and it's almost it's almost kind of axiomatic, well it's almost kind of self-justifying. The only limit that could be the could afford fittingness that would not be oppressive is a limit that opens possibility. There it would have to be. Like you have to get a telos because telos limits, fittingness limits. So you need a limit that opens possibility that you'd never get without the limit. Do you see what I'm saying? That has to be the quality of telos to avoid the critiques against telos as oppressive, right? It
mhm.
has to be a fitting end of which opens creative possibility.
Yes.
Okay. The argument that I'm putting forth first is that relationality between human beings opens creative possibility. Therefore, the limit of otherness almost seems to be by definition the necessary quality of a limit that would afford the possibility of fittingness without creating oppression. Do you see what I'm saying? So then the question is, do table manners afford relationality? And if the answer is yes, then you ought to do them.
Mhm,
It is fitting because it opens up interaction between people that has more creative possibility than subject objects.
Mhm.
Now, then there's the move there where you want to be paying attention because if someone becomes really picky over the table
Mhm.
manners, then the table manners that were supposed to be about relationality and thus creative possibility are now shutting down creative possibility. So you throw out the table manners because now they're getting in the way of creative possibility because you're becoming too adamant. So this live discernment seems to be really important. So you have a basis that table manners is good, but then you start to pay attention to if people become self-righteous of them, or they're overfitting them at the expense of the relationality, and then you brush them aside, or you don't emphasize them, or something. Something like that
Mhm.
seems to be the heuristic by which we need to think the problem. And this could apply to needs, wants, whatever, something like that.
Yeah.
But let me throw it to you.
Well, what if somebody says, "Well, that's all nice and well, Daniel, but creative possibility can be very chaotic."
Yeah, again, that's why you need table man. That's why you need to start with some kind of
Right,
basis.
and that's why it's like this sliding scale of discernment. It's kind of it makes me think a lot about like Yolande, right? You know, I've been bringing up her book, The Art of Choosing, but she talks about she's talking about nutrition, and she's talking about how it's not just about the food. It's about also the context and the meaning
Yeah,
of a food.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
she was making this example of like, probably a chemical laden Cheeto or something that these, not her neighbors who don't have a lot of money gave to her daughter. And then their daughter offered it to her. And that was an offering from people who cared to give that to her.
Yeah.
People could think this is absolutely hogwash, but for her, I see a wisdom in that discernment of sometimes it's actually fitting to
Yes,
accept that
exactly.
Cheeto
That's a great.
and to
Yeah,
say thank you and to
yeah.
be grateful and to understand that it would be at your spiritual expense to not say thank you
And to
and
make a big
accept
deal
that.
of it being
Yeah.
unhealthy.
Oh, you shouldn't be eating those, and that's
Yeah,
bad, and
exactly,
like
exactly.
which she even admits what she would have done
Yeah,
years in the years past because she did care a lot. She does care about like her health and stuff,
yes,
but it's like she realizes that the very care you have for something can be at the very expense of the thing you wish to preserve
yes,
with your care, with your whatever ethic. And so, yeah, I think it's such a beautiful example of the fact that sometimes it's actually better to not insist about the manners.
yes,
However, sometimes it's important to teach and
yes,
demonstrate and uphold certain standards of manners. It's not so it's just that it's so hard for our brains to hear this because it just sounds like, well, are you, it can just sound like you're saying to not ever have manners, but
yes.
certainly not the point at all. The point is to understand the fittedness, and that actually takes a human discernment. We can't just outsource it to some system.
Well, but that's the problem with
It's a
having
human
yeah,
discernment.
that's the problem with brains overly drunk on the technological
Yeah.
essence versus artfulness needed for thinking and
Mhm.
actual human beings. Like it's
Yep.
right or wrong. We're all drunk on this subconsciously. We don't think there's
Yeah.
conditionalism. The
Oh,
human is found as conditionalism,
mhm.
live discernment.
Live
Like
discernment.
in exercise, when you say normally when you're just getting a bag of Cheetos, then normally the condition is that this is not something we want to eat. But in a condition where your poor neighbor has given it and it's an offering, then in this condition you do want to eat it. And in fact, if you don't, it almost retrospectively
Mhm.
makes all the health decisions mute because you're killing your soul. So what does it matter?
Exactly.
Right. But that's live discernment. And we are
Exactly.
not educated for live discernment.
No.
And this is one of the reasons why the telos conversation and fittiness conversation so confuses us
Mhm.
because we are thinking of, oh, so you're saying a boat is for water, you're pressing it. But of course you could imagine a boat being used as a house someone, you can imagine a boat being used as a house by someone who finds this boat in the middle of
Or a
the field.
table
That's
or
correct. You can of
yeah,
course no one is saying a
a
house
cool
can't be
whatever.
used that way,
Yeah.
but the possibilities of the boat that are uniquely afforded, because there's also something to be about it. It's not just anything that can be put in water and used to sail. There are only certain things that can meet those criteria. And
Yeah.
so there's a way in which the boat being in water opens up all of these possibilities, these creative possibilities, that it is unique to it. Now, of course, there's something creative about using a boat as a house in a field, of course. And that's why you wouldn't want to have an ethic to say boats should never be used as houses in fields. But also, if a boat is being used as a house in the field, you're probably dealing with a tragic situation where someone, because it's hard to get air conditioning in boats. Now, it's hard to get like beds and things, right? This is probably a tragic situation. Now, if someone has a lot of money and has gone out of their way to turn a boat into a house and it's some sort of cool art thing, that's great. But that's probably not the average. But
Yeah.
you should also be open to seeing the boat used that way to say that's really cool, while also noting that the high majority of the time, boats are going to be used for water because of the unique things a boat can do in water,
Exactly.
whereas things that can't be put in water, like just a normal house, could be a house, right? So, in a
Mhm.
way, when a boat is being used as a house, it's creative, but then it's also dishonoring its uniqueness. as a unique as something unique for sailing. You see what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
that's why even if you say it's more creative, there's a kind of dishonoring of the uniqueness of the thing in that creativity. So you could actually argue there's a devolution in that creativity that's going on. So that's something. There's something about fittingness that doesn't devolve the thing while opening possibility. So if you have something that's creative that kind of devolves its possibility in a certain
Yes,
way, it's
exactly.
not as creative. The more fitting thing would be something that honors its uniqueness as
Mhm.
a boat and opens up possibility.
Exactly.
But you've got to discern that, please.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna. I mean, you said it all because I was just gonna say going back to somebody saying, "Well, Daniel, that's all good and well, but creativity can be chaotic."
Yes.
That's why it's not merely
No.
creativity;
No.
it's a creativity with the fittedness, right? Where the
Yes.
the potentiality is actually at its most optimal in a
Yes.
sense, right? Where you're not detracting or diminishing the potentiality,
Right.
or maybe even cutting off its primary
Yes.
potentiality
Yes.
in that creativity. So yeah, that's important because, and actually, that's a larger point to creativity in general,
Oh, yes.
because a lot of times if we don't have an understanding of fittedness as it relates to creativity,
It's just chaos.
it is
It's just multiplicity. It's just making things.
yeah, spurious infinity, or it's
It's
just you have
spurious.
no,
Yeah.
yeah, there's no there's no kind of structure or there's no longevity, there's
Yes.
no sort of understanding of its integration with the other aspects of your life. And I mean, all of life is creative, but you get what I'm saying.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, yeah, and people can use that as almost an excuse. Well, I'm just that's my creativity,
Yes.
right? Well, okay, but is that creativity also in line with its with fittedness?
Well, and this actually brings up something super important. The question becomes the test of the true infinity or the spurs. So let me, and that gets to memory. So, for
Okay.
example, I would argue books like uh, Ulysses by James Joyce. You could argue it's chaotic, but it's actually remarkably structured, and a lot like the my beloved Sound and the Fury.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are many books that seem chaotic that actually are very structured. Like
Mm-hmm.
many great works of art that are remarkably structured. And one of the problems is we have this idea that structure kills creative
Yes.
possibility. More
Yes.
structure, less
Yes.
creative possibility. But here's the thing. Um, the less structure, the more it may make room for different interpretations by different people. Okay. But then what's very interesting is I think a very structured work like The Sound and the Fury creates the potential for more creative, for more interpretations and surprising realizations in the same person. And this is very important because, like The Sound and the Fury, I think it's so well designed because every time I read it, I get something new.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas books or works that for me are not as good, but there's like 10,000 different interpretations, my interpretation really has never changed. So it's more spurious. This is my point. Like it's more spurious. The real test of creativity is actually in memory. Not simply that there are 50 people who all have different interpretations of the work. You say, oh, well, that's more creative. No, I think that's more spurious. And actually, it's more of the work is not so much creative as is the people interpreting it are creating the work. So it's actually one creative possibility that looks like it's all that thing, but each person is actually bringing a creative interpretation. So it's actually just a list of one interpretation 50 times because each person in the observing of the work is creating their own interpretation that actually is their own work. Whereas when I go to the Sound and Fury and I get something entirely new out of it 30 times, it has to be the work doing that. The work has to be doing that because it's created and structured in such a way that it constantly surprises me with insights and possibility. It seems infinite
Mm-hmm.
in that way. And so what I think has occurred is a lot of the times we consider creativity in a spurious way. We say this work is more creative because, there's like 50,000 different interpretations of it. But a true creative work is more like a true infinity, which is more circular,
Mm-hmm.
which the test of that is memory. Like
Mm-hmm.
if a work doesn't live on in your memory, and you find yourself thinking about it as you look at the tree and go, oh, this is what Faulkner was talking about. That is the evidence of creativity. The test of creativity is not the number of interpretations, the quantity, but the quality of interpretation that continues to become more and more alive in memory through time.
Mm-hmm.
And the argument would be that something has reached its fittingness when it lives in memory more so.
Mm-hmm.
Versus there's like 50 people with different but let me stop and throw it to you.
No, that's an important point. That's good. I guess I'm just thinking to myself, um, because I can hear somebody saying like, well, Daniel, like people are going to have their different interpretations of it,
Sure.
right? What's
Sure.
what's wrong with that? Well, the fact of the matter is that everything needs to be coupled with a fittingness, with fittedness, which it has to do with memory, as
Yes.
you said. So Actually, there are bad interpretations. Like,
Yeah,
no, I'm
there is.
and, you know, in
There
some
is.
ways, I'm not saying that
And I'm
I'm not
not and let
saying,
me
like
jump in and just say, I'm not saying it is necessarily bad if there are 50 interpretations. But if all we have is a list of interpretations and each one of those needs to do the true infinity thing then
yeah,
to be the real
exactly. Well,
test.
that's the thing. It's not,
It needs to be horizontal and vertical. But if it's horizontal and not vertical,
right,
that's not going to
right.
suffice.
And in that sense, yeah, okay, so, I said something like, "Well, maybe there are wrong interpretations." I don't mean that in
There are, but there can be
well
10 right interpretations. But
maybe you
here's
have
the key. If the work is doing the work of that
yeah,
interpretation, you'll be able to have a constructive
exactly,
dialogue between the 10
exactly.
conversations. If you
Well,
can't have
yeah.
constructive dialogue, then that's a problem.
Well, it's and look, it would only be wrong in so much as somebody fixed it right there.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
okay, that's the interpretation. That's the interpretation, and that's and usually it kind of comes with sometimes a self righteous spirit.
Yes.
Like this is the interpretation, right?
Yes.
Which is kind of funny because ironically, the when you have less self righteousness about what the interpretation is, you may have this tarrying with it, which will afford over time the truest kind of like the true
Yes.
infinity of that interpretation. So in a sense, but I do think it's important because we kind of do sometimes think that like any interpretation is fair, if it
Yes.
is right.
Yes.
And it's like unless you've done the work to re-examine and
Yes.
rework with that and
Yes.
hold it in memory
Yes.
and see
Yes.
how it plays out,
Yes.
see how the
Yes.
justification of that interpretation plays out, it may not be right. It might be
No.
right, but it might not be right. And
Correct.
when you get too locked into that's my interpretation and that's it. Like you've truncated the process of seeing and of it coming to fruition to see if that interpretation is actually correct or not. And people do this all the time. I mean, this is what happens where we talk about it in relation to the Sound of the Fury, right?
Yes.
But people do this with each other all the
With human
time,
being,
right? Like, oh
absolutely.
well, that's what that all meant, or that's what that person did, and this
Yes.
meant like this, and you kind of just that's it, instead of
Yes.
like allowing it to just continue to unfold and now of course you're going to have human judgments like we all
Yes.
do. It's just
Yes.
human to do that, but to get too locked into what it means versus allow it to show itself to you through time
Yes.
is the danger. And yeah.
Well, then the question is, what are interpretations for? Like, what are they trying to unlock? Which is back to the fittingness question,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So there's something to be said, like, if you have this thing where there's 50 different interpretations and each one of them are kind of locked in themselves and can't communicate with other people, the point of interpretation has to be for encountering a limit that opens things up.
Yeah.
Good interpretations are tested by the ability to create a space with other
Yes,
interpretations
yes.
that then
It's like Venn
create
diagram,
it,
right? Like, it's
yes,
like
a
the
Venn
overlap.
diagram that then in that overlap,
Yeah,
as I'll
yeah,
use hope to lose, creative possibility erupts,
exactly.
right? So the test of good interpretations is in a sense, do they afford self-forgetful conversation?
Mm,
If they do not, then the interpretations, in my opinion, are not doing what is fitting for them
mhm,
because the point
mhm,
is creative possibility. And if the interpretations are not doing, once interpretations become like fortresses, that's not what interpretations are for. The question, well, then you're using it for the good to be right. And that's violence, like we said, because the good without the beautiful turns to violence. It's not beautiful, though. Like, what are interpretations that open beauty? Well, beauty is like a dance, which is structured but also
mhm,
not rigid. Whereas chaos has no structure, so it's chaos. But you don't. A dance is like in a jazz improvisation is kind of the mean, as we've talked about many times, between structure and openness.
mhm,
An interpretation needs to create a field of structured
mhm,
openness, and a
mhm,
successful work of art
mhm,
create structured openness in this way between people, which then have them encountering the limit of the other person
mhm,
that opens up creative possibilities. So
mhm,
then, like, if fittedness is in the business of opening creative possibility, then basically that needs to be applied to all areas of life. Like, so if you say, "What? Okay, I want this. Should I want it or not?"
yeah,
Well, does X afford creative possibility? And I'll just say creative possibility to refer to everything we've said. Does it create creative possibility or not? Which kind of almost has to mean, does it create relationality or not? Right? And if you say,
mhm,
should I put a boundary up? Well, does it afford creative possibility and relationality or not? Because here's the thing: there are some people that their presence destroys relationships because they're toxic, right? So you need a boundary there, but you're actually putting up the boundary not to keep out the otherness, but to continue the possibility of relating with otherness,
mhm,
right? Because otherwise they've destroyed your mental health or something, right? So there's a place where boundary creates the possibility of relationality, right?
mhm,
So likewise, wants, desires, needs, you can think through all of these things and have a live discernment about them relative to the degree they create conditions of possibility versus not. Does this thing you want, is it going to open conditions of possibility or be or not? Because if we learn from psychoanalysis that no object of desire fulfills us, then if we're getting the thing to be fulfilled, then it's going to fail. It won't be fitting. But if you
Mhm,
get the thing to open up a field of
mhm,
surprises and encounters and beauty, well, then it would be justified to get that thing, because what is fitting for things to do is contribute to creativity, to contribute to creation. And you could think of kind of Whitehead here, or Bergson, or
mhm,
all the other people we talk about, Gurdjieff, or whatever. So there's something about justifying wants, needs, desires, all of that in terms of what opens creative possibility. And I think it is just so important, because once you understand telos and final causes are for the sake of creating horizons, opening up spaces of creative possibility, you see how this language is not closing off or shutting down. It is actually the very necessity. Like the point of the social is to create. The point of relationality is to create for things to happen that otherwise could not occur, because beauty and creativity go together. So you ask yourself, when it comes to ethics, to norms, do these open creative possibility or not? Because if you simply ask, is it good? Then you end up in problems. You end up in power and self righteousness and stuff like that. But let me throw it to you.
Well, two things are coming to mind as you were speaking, and I do agree with everything you just said. But I was thinking about back to the point of well, here it's two things. So let's just take the example of somebody who's addicted to nicotine.
Sure.
So what if they're like, well, if I don't have a cigarette, like there's no creative potentiality for me.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So for them, like I guess I'm trying to think about how this like how does this map
That's a
over
great
to
question.
addiction?
Yeah,
Because and then again, I think the moment you're kind of like say you're assessing somebody else and you're like, gee, they seem to need this to be like able to just be okay, right,
yeah,
and to be able to be in that state of
yes,
openness for creative potentiality.
yes.
um then you're thinking, okay, well, what is that thing exactly, and why might they want that thing, whatever it is. And can you have a kind of, in a sense, grace for that, but also realize that, okay, well, maybe it is something that they need to be able to relinquish in order to be able to be more free to do creative potentiality. So that's the first thing.
Well, that's an excellent question,
So
and not to jump
no,
on it, but
please, yeah, I'm
I would personally not want to have to need a cigarette in order to create,
I
because
don't
what
either,
if
but
I
yeah,
don't have cigarettes? There's a
right, there's a
contingency.
contingency,
I want as
exactly.
few contingencies in my life as possible. And the
Yes.
problem is, if you say, "Well, I need to drink, or I need alcohol, I need I need perfect quiet." All of these are contingencies.
And
They're
that's,
not
yeah,
inherently bad.
yeah.
I don't think it's actually very productive to say smoking is evil or something like that, right? However, I personally would say the more contingencies you have in order to be open to be open to life, to
Mhm.
be creative, then the less possible worlds in which you are creative. You see what I'm saying? Like the less possible
And
circumstances,
you
and
outsource your conditionality. Like the
you
thing
want
is,
to outsource
you
as little as
well,
possible.
right, you should, because if you outsource it, because you're thinking, well, it's just conditional, right? Like I'll make the
Sure,
conditions
but is
are
it
I
a
have,
necessary
but
condition?
yeah, like you already have to do conditions within yourself.
There will
So,
be some level of outsourcing, but less is better.
well, what I mean to say is like a lot of times I think we do that outsourcing of the external condition because that feels easier than doing the internal work
Yes,
of the internal
yes,
conditions.
yes, yes,
So I
yes.
mean, just
Well, your
and
goal,
you may
so that
you yeah. So go ahead.
well, you want to do as much work on yourself as you can, not to outsource. And
Yeah.
then after you go through all of that really hard work, you're going to come upon things that you can't help but outsource. And those things are okay to outsource. That's It's
Mhm.
okay to ask for help, for example. It's okay to need that thing, right? Because that's when you're starting to get at the things that if you don't honor, you don't meet your fittedness. And there are going to be things you need to honor for humility, because I actually think humility is a necessary part of fittedness.
Yeah.
Because if you're not humble, and if there's nothing you need, then you don't need the world. And if you
Mhm.
don't need the world, then you're not going to live in a way where the world can give anything to you per
Yeah.
se. You're not going to be open to the world. So there are going to be things you can outsource, but they're on the other side of the work to
You mean there's going to be things you do need to
there
outsource?
are going to be things you
Yeah.
do need to out. It's no different than when we talk about bestocentrism
Yeah.
and belonging again with Nietzsche, because I would argue Nietzsche is the thinker of critiquing bestocentrism. He
Bestow. Yeah.
wants the subject to be more on the side of becoming versus bestowing. Now
Bestowing.
that gets into the Abyssal Arrows paper and the Gay Science Book 5, but the point is there's going to be some bestowing. You're going to need to learn something from some people, but
Hmm.
you don't want any more bestowing than necessary. But then
Exactly.
also realizing it is not self-evident what bestowing is accidental versus necessary. That's when we have grace for ourselves and others,
Right.
because there's a lifelong experimentation to work out. If the guy who needs the cigarette, well, don't make him feel like a jerk right now. Help him be on a road over 2 years of getting off the cigarette, or
Exactly.
maybe be if he says, "Well, I don't want to," well, just let it go then. It's no skin off your back.
Yeah, he's the one paying for it, right?
Yeah.
Like you have to
So
buy them or whatever.
though
Yeah,
there's the key is creating space for that live discernment
yeah,
that we're working
exactly.
on. But let me throw it to you.
Well, and yeah, it relates to the next thing I was going to say, where somebody could just say, "Well, I just need to not be annoyed in order to be open up." Like
Sure.
it's a kind of it's another form of the outsourcing of conditionality when you blame another person for
Yes.
your inability to get into a creative potentiality,
Yes.
into a state of. So when this is why I think it's important to identify annoyance. As it relates to fittedness and appropriate behaviors or engagements, et cetera, because a lot of times people think, well, as soon as I'm not annoyed, if as soon as that person stops doing the annoying thing, then I'll be able to be, and
Yeah.
it's actually their fault that I'm not able to
Yeah. It's
ever
their
get to
fault.
the
Yeah.
creative
Hmm.
potentiality. When really you've put on yourself a type of condition that now you have to get over that hurdle. Like you have to, and you can't control the other person anyway. You really can't. In the sense that, like, like just think about two adults and they're both annoying each other. Well, they can't really control each other. They can control it themselves. So,
Right.
um, what I mean to say is that that's important because, again, I think a lot of times it's not really identified as like a dynamic. And yet, if you are not self skeptical about your own annoyance, other people will be annoyed with you and you'll be frustrated that they're annoyed with you when really you are annoyed with them. So
Yeah.
it's just such a mirroring thing that occurs. And I
Yes.
think what's important is to realize that that is something to relinquish the best you can, again doing this internal work, doing the work of that, so that
Hmm.
you can get to the place where you're not again blaming other people for why you cannot get to the place of the creative potentiality,
Yeah.
which actually was always, it's kind of like the joy thing, right? It's always there for you, but there are conditions that have to be met. Don't think that all the conditions are out there trying to get you and keep you from it. Maybe they are. However, it's may also be your perspective on those out external
Yes.
things, which is causing it to become a constant impediment, which doesn't really need to be an impediment.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that too.
Yeah, but that's where the logic of the good without the beautiful is not very helpful. Because if all you have what is good, well,
Mhm.
why?
Yeah.
Why overcome my annoyance? Then I'll just be passive and kind of stomped over, right? Why don't they overcome their annoyance?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
so then the question, you can't escape telos.
Yeah.
You can't escape questions of fittingness.
And
Like,
it's true. Like the person's like, the person might be like, but they're really being annoying.
yeah,
It's like,
you're denying the truth.
exactly.
You're being passive. You're being actually enabling. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
enabling
Yeah.
bad
Yeah.
behavior. But
Yeah.
that is why you cannot escape. Like, it's a giant claim. We would have to say more. You cannot escape questions of telos and final ends and things like that. You just
Yeah,
can't
but
do it.
well, and basically all of the philosophy stuff, this is why we talk about it so much, because
Yeah.
you have to slow down to get to think about, like, okay, you get into some big questions right then. Should
Yes.
another person doing a certain thing make you and this actually there's a book I'm reading that actually gets into this. But anyways, it's like it's such a and then maybe it's a speed thing too. It kind of makes me think a little bit of Leo, because
Yeah.
of like we're in a very fast paced sort of age in our technological essence, and it kind of we map that over, we like allow it to sort
Yes.
of like blend and blur with our
Yes.
realities. So as soon as somebody's doing something annoys us, we say they made me mad,
Yes.
they made me, but actually they cannot,
Make you technically.
in a sense. And so practically they did, technically they can't. So
Yeah.
there's a way in which you have
Right.
to slow down to understand that distinction, because otherwise you will constantly outsource your power to that other person,
Yes.
which is the very thing you don't want to do,
Yeah.
like that. So they really like a person could do this, that, the other, but really ultimately you choose. You won't necessarily choose how you feel in the moment of them doing X, Y, or Z, but you do have the choice to decide what you're going to do with that,
Yeah.
or like what you're going to carry on to do with that.
Yes.
Um, and it's it just takes it takes a slowness, because in our we just think of it as cause and effect. They did this, they annoyed me, so it's their fault. Instead of it being like, okay, they did this, and maybe it actually has nothing to do with me, and actually I can separate my, like, that's the funny thing. Like, we are annoyed with difference as we conflate ourselves into that which we said annoyed us and
Yeah.
made us
Yeah.
feel a
Yeah.
certain way.
Yeah.
Do
Yes.
It's a very strange thing, but we're actually kind of like consuming the whole situation into ourself,
Yes.
instead of actually allowing, like, wait, I'm annoyed by difference, but really I'm not allowing the difference for me to be able to do a different reaction or have a
Yes.
different response or choose to not be annoyed.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, it will take work and effort and practice, and you'll mess up along the way. But there is a way in which you can start to say, I'm not, that I don't need to allow that to annoy me.
But then the question is why not? And
Yeah,
if you're stuck
and
in
then
the
somebody
good,
say, "Well, but I tried.
yeah, that's right.
I tried to
Yeah,
not be annoyed by that, but it still is annoying." And again,
because
back to the reality thing of like, again, like you said, somebody could say, "Well, then the person's just gonna stomp on you. They're just gonna intentionally annoy you." Da da da
yeah,
da.
exactly.
You know.
So if you're stuck in the good, you're doomed because
Mhm.
it's good not to be stepping. So it's good to stand up for yourself. It's
Yeah,
good
it's good
not
that
to
person
tolerate. Yeah,
stops being annoying
yeah.
or whatever.
So
Yeah.
you've got to say, but is it beautiful? Are we affording beauty? And then beauty is
Mhm.
the encounter of limit, a surprising encounter with limit that opens creative possibility, that has authority on you, that demands something of you. Because this is the $1 million issue. You are trying. Because again, if you start talking about you can't avoid telos, well, so what? We talking about a capital T truth? I know Javier's been working on Richard Rory and neo-pragmatism and all that. If you talk about capital T truth, you're barking up a problem. You're going to go back to totalitarianism and postmodernism is trying to correct this. And I like what Javier is doing, talking about neo-pragmatism, right, or pragmatism more as redescription.
Mhm.
What is a
Yeah.
practical description? Because that's creative possibility in
Yeah.
different things. But you definitely see in Rotary, and Javier and Aaron noted this as well, a certain dismissal of all metaphysical claims,
Mhm.
all telos in it. You can't do it. You can't do it.
Mhm.
And if you because the dream was that science could fill that, ultimately, that science
Absolutely.
could provide. And the best argument for that is Jonathan Routz's Kindly Inquisitors,
Mhm.
base where he takes a lot from Karl Popper. That is the best kind of argument of why, and I agree with it, why scientific truth should get a certain privileged position in
Mhm.
society, because it is truth of which is dependent on no one in particular, is the
Mhm.
way Jonathan Routz says it. The idea is that a scientific truth is something that if you went into the laboratory and looked at, you'd see the results. If a guy in Alaska did, if a guy in China, if anyone who goes into the laboratory would see the same result. It is not person contingent, right? Now, the problem, as I would then argue, is not everything falls under the category of scientific truth. Like, and
Mhm.
that's where you have the reputation crisis.
Replication.
Yes, there are
Yeah.
sociological truths that are person conditioned. So the issue is, even though scientific truth can provide some common basis in the
Yeah.
way Rauch is talking about, once you get into stuff like the psychoanalytical, or the stuff that people do, or dealing with difference in families and all of that, or the stuff Peter Berger's talking about, it falls apart. You
Mhm.
you need something else. So truth can be useful, as the good can be useful for something in common, but the moment you start overfitting it, you get into trouble. And the problem is, inevitably in life, you come to the place where you can't deal with your tensions unless you think beauty. And we don't have beauty as a dominant concept in our society, so we're in trouble, right? We're simply thinking about, the main question is who's right? Like, in this argument, who's right? That's the main thing we're concerned about. Most people are concerned about who's right, who's telling the truth, and
Who's
et
right?
cetera,
Who's wrong?
who's wrong, et cetera, as if that's the main value. And people say, no, it's about love in the community. You can say that to all day in the face, but how can you mean it unless you
Mhm.
believe in beauty,
Yeah.
right? Because what it means to love someone is to do what's good. To love someone is to be truthful. So then concepts like love, and well, the point of the family is not about being right, but the family. Yeah, but what is a family? Good. So you want the good to be in the family, right? You can't. You end up in a lot of impasses that are very, very problematic. More to say about 30.
Yeah, that's all very good, Daniel. That's all very good. Um, I hmm, I guess I was just going back. Like, there's some. Sorry, I want to go back to this just for a little bit longer because I think I just feel myself having some questions about it in the sense of, when I said this thing about like, well, the person's annoying, so essentially you have to do the work to get to the place where you're not annoyed by them. Um, I think like there's a part of me that's like it's possible because I know in my, not that I do this perfectly, I certainly don't in some areas of my life, but like I do think that I have seen how when I've turned what somebody was trying to annoy me with into almost a play, like
Yeah.
playfulness with that, or
Yes.
almost laughter, or
Yes.
like you kind of just it undercuts the very effort that thing's making,
Yes.
and then it's kind of like, oh, never mind, I'm not gonna. That's
But that's a creative moment.
yeah, it's a creative moment, and I guess I just, for somebody who just wants, is it, I don't know. I guess I'm trying to think about the person who just doesn't want to believe that it's possible to cultivate a subjectivity that could not be annoyed by something, because they're just like, I no, you know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
just like, I can't, or no, or I won't. I mean, ultimately, that points to me, and it might sound harsh, but like they're basically ultimately just making a choice to not have that
Mhm.
possibility in their life.
Yeah.
Um,
But why should they if all they have is the good?
yeah.
Like, what vision can you give to them that their life would be better not to do that? right? And if you're not living in a certain way with beauty and shine and et cetera, so forth, then they've got a point, right? So
Yeah.
you have to be able, without beauty, you can't really offer a compelling counter for why they should, right?
Mhm.
Other than you ought to. But then they're like, well, I think you ought not to. And you're stuck in relativity,
Yeah, yeah,
right? The only
yeah,
thing that trumps relativity is beauty.
yeah.
Because but the funny thing about beauty is it trumps relativity with conditionalism, which
Mhm,
entails something like relativity, but
mhm,
it's not merely relative,
mm,
like the rainbow example from Barfield, et cetera, so forth.
mhm, mhm, mm. Yeah, and that gets me thinking about what it looks like for beauty to show up
Yes.
in the daily, like in
Mhm.
the quotidian and in the little moments and in these little interactions and all that. And it kind of makes me think again about Yolande a little bit, because she was talking about loving that your children want to show you things. Like she was basically saying you can choose to love all the things that your children are doing, and and be fully present in a type of love and a presence with what they are doing instead of it allowing it to become annoyance.
Right.
And that's huge because it actually changes the atmosphere, it changes the environment, it changes the relations
Mm.
to the point where you also are more effective. I mean, she didn't say this, but it's related to some of the other things she shared, where it's more effective in your ability to teach, to expect,
Yep.
in the sense of there are expectations, right there. And I guess I'm just saying, like, maybe it's just that it's such a it's we overlook how to bring beauty into the quotidian and the little moments because it's almost so simple. Like, not that it's not profound, it's absolutely it's like the simple
Yeah. Yeah.
profundity of beauty. Of course, beauty is profound, beauty is mysterious, but there's also something simple too
Mhm.
about it. Making eye contact, actually emitting love from yourself
Yep.
to the other
Yeah.
person.
Yes.
Love to me
Creating
seems very key.
conditions. Yeah,
Yeah,
new
love
conditions,
seems
yeah.
very key. And but this is the thing, everybody does think they're doing what's loving.
Yeah.
And then people are like harmed by that love, and then they say, I don't want your love, I don't want your care. Because
Yes.
if this is what it means, I don't want that, right?
Yes.
And so, but when it really comes down to the love that is in line with beauty, it seems to be this ability to really let everything else go to the point where you can demonstrate and hold a kind of love for the other person fully, genuinely, not, not in some denial, but in like a genuine way. All as you will sometimes need to correct or teach or share or, communicate or whatever, uh, have harder conversations or something like that. Because so I'm just trying to, I don't know what do you think? Because I mean, it can sound abstract, possibly, to say to have the standard of beauty is what's going to inform
Yes.
all of
Yes.
these things. So I just wanted to kind of bring it into like the some of
Yes.
those practical things of what that means to do that in the little
Well, but
moments,
this is where,
which can be open
I
up a
mean,
big
there's an argument that
conversation.
it's abstract to say that it's good or bad. It's
Yeah,
abstract to say that it's true. I mean,
yeah,
the
yeah,
secret is that it's all abstract. It's
yeah,
just that here's the key. Some get, some do an emotional sleight of hand
yeah,
to make
yeah.
you think it's not
Yeah,
abstract.
like it's concrete.
That is
It's a
concrete,
yeah.
but really it's just an emotional sleight of hand. So, for
Hmm.
example, if you're to use your example, if you're getting annoyed with someone for doing X, you just say, well, they just shouldn't do X. But that's abstract. Where based on what, right? But because you feel annoyed, the emotion does a sleight of hand
Mm,
to make something abstract seem concrete,
very concrete.
right? So, likewise, when I say the fact is X, right? Well, that's actually abstract because I've never done the study myself. Say, for example, it's relying on a scientist, and I don't actually know that. And furthermore, I'm using that fact perhaps to serve a worldview, and I'm deciding that fact justifies that worldview when there could be a jump there. And
Mhm,
that gets into the critique of pure observation from third thoughts. But the point is, even saying that's true is abstract. But you do an emotional sleight of hand because it feels concrete, right?
mhm,
Like if I say this is a table, well, yes, no, it's also composed of things, and there's a
mhm.
discernment there, right? So
Yeah.
we're actually constantly dealing with abstractions.
Mm,
Everything, in a certain sense, is abstract, but for some reason, because of how we get socialized,
yes.
habituated, the key is habituated. There are some abstractions that we pull an emotional sleight of hand to feel are concrete when they're not. The
Mm.
issue is we don't have a society habituating us and socializing us into beauty and the qualities of beauty. Therefore, that's abstract, well, the good and the true are not, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And that's a socialization problem, but that's a conditionalism
yeah.
problem, right? We also don't know what to look for
Mm,
um, when we're looking for qualities of beauty. Like if qualities of the good, you look for intentions, you look for, how you feel, you look for fairness, you look for things,
cooperation or yeah.
cooperation and things like that, right? And maybe outcome and stuff. and you know to look for those qualities. And we've become very habituated into looking for those qualities because we live under the technological essence. So we're trained into looking for the good because we also, under the technological essence, conflate the good and the true. If it is good, it must be true.
Yeah.
Because when a computer works well, then all the facts and electrical pieces work together.
Yeah.
So the facts work for the good, right? But that, although that describes some phenomenon, we can't overfit into other things. We've got to learn what are the qualities of the beautiful to look for. So, for example, just one I'll throw to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've talked about it all season too. Energy.
Yeah.
Energy is the beautiful. Like, if the energy feels terrible, if the vibe sucks, then when you say I tried, it's like, it doesn't matter. The vibe sucks. Like, you wouldn't think I tried would be enough of a counter if the vibe sucks. If the vibe is more important than the intention. So what's more important to you? The vibe or the intention? If you say the intention, you're saying the good is more important than the beautiful. Because vibe is a beauty thing. It is a flow thing. It is an energetics thing, right? So, if you start saying, to kind of be like, I tried, it didn't work, as if that ends the matter, right? Well, who are you to end the matter? That's a decision you've made, right? Which closes off, and closing off is the opposite of flow and energetic. So there's a quality here, and there's more to say, but let me give it to you.
No, no, that's good. That's very good. Discerning the energy for sure. I do think that there's something about, and I mentioned it before, but I do think there's this element of playfulness
Yes,
that is
playfulness is
really
big.
key in
Hmm.
terms of incorporating beauty, because it's art. There's an artfulness in playfulness that diffuses, that
Yep.
can diffuse. It's like it's the live discernment, and it's the ability to realize, oh wait, okay, I'm gonna take off the petal a little here, put a little petal here. Like you're it's it's like also when you're cooking, right?
Yes.
You're like, okay, I need this, it needs a little bit more of this, and you're really, there's something about being able to discern in the moment what you need to let off on and what you need to
Yes.
incorporate more of. And I do think that ability to bring in play, and um this doesn't mean that there's never the seriousness, because sometimes that's absolutely what
Yes. Yes.
absolutely necessary for beauty. We've talked
Yes.
about like a vessel
Yes.
of judgment, right?
Yes.
It's very important. But there's something about, yes, the element of play. There is a type of um and I don't know, obviously I'm thinking about it maybe in more familial context, but I do think that this applies in other areas too, where you can kind of open up more space for genuine conversation too. Um, and you could say, oh, okay, so that's like the beautiful in the everyday life. I mean, I think it can be. I think it absolutely can be.
The beautiful has to be surprising. And conversation is where things are said you've never thought about that before.
Yeah,
When you enter
yeah,
the dialogos sort
yeah.
of space, and
Exactly,
it opens things
exactly.
up. So definitely conversation is a conditional possibility for the strike of beauty.
Absolutely,
100%.
absolutely. So yeah, I think that the thing too with beauty, it's not something that like we possess, that we, kind of portion out when we really need it, and like, it's, or whatever, use it like a band-aid. Like it's actually just a living force and energy that we are not able to in a sense control, but again, we create the conditions for it to potentially come forth, like you're saying with the strike of beauty, to be able to come forth.
Yes.
And I do think that, again, this ability to play, diffuse, discern, get artful in your engagements is crucial to being able to allow the potentiality for, again, the strike of beauty. And
Yes.
also, when people are able to just seem to be enjoying themselves a bit more, it's not merely enjoyment, but there is something about the ability for people to seem to be more at ease and able to enjoy themselves that, again, opens them. It's kind of like the nervous system is a bit safer in that
Yes.
regard, to be able to encounter the strike of beauty, if
Well,
that makes any sense.
yes. And there's a
Now,
few
yeah,
things.
that kind of opens up a bigger question for
No,
me
no,
on
no,
that, but
no.
yeah.
I mean, it's everything. And unfortunately, I have to go to work
Yes,
here in a
yes,
little
yes.
bit. So there's a few things. First, I don't think people ever feel at ease unless they've had surprising things happen with a group and everything doesn't go to heck. Like, if you
Mm,
get used to surprising topics coming up or not knowing what you're going to do and yet there's no fighting, then you feel at ease. A lot of people, unfortunately, most of the relationships that they say are good relationships are ones that they've actually monitored in such a way
yeah,
that
yeah,
nothing
yeah.
surprising ever
Yeah, so
occurs.
they're at ease, but it's really more like
It's a very
it's kind of
fragile at
it's a
ease.
fragile
It's
at
not
ease, yeah.
anti,
And
like
it's fine. It's gonna,
real,
yeah, you can
like
kind of get
Sabbath.
lucky kind of thing,
Yes,
but
like real Sabbath rest is going to be anti-fragile.
yeah.
Meaning with this group, the surprising can occur and we're fine.
Yeah.
And basically, and also negativity can occur and we're
Yeah.
fine. If that's not the case, then you will not feel at ease,
Yeah.
right?
And
So
that's gonna not be as in line with beauty at all.
no, it
Yeah.
will not, because beauty has to be surprising. Beauty has
Exactly.
to be outside of
Exactly.
control, and that fundamentally, excuse me, and artfulness. I think many
Yes.
relationships for people get systemized to keep out surprise.
Yep.
But then that just means it's good. It can't be beautiful. Now,
Yeah.
if you don't know how to handle beauty without getting destroyed, maybe that's better,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But that logic inevitably leads you to avoiding difference, hikikomoriism, and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, so I suppose like the first thing to do is almost if I were to just give like concrete example, because ultimately what is being pointed to is that every fittedness is tied to opening an aperture, opening horizons,
Hmm.
opening creative possibilities,
Hmm.
kind of opening up the probability of you being surprised by something that then you have to respond to. And I
Hmm.
think that's where character is developed is
Hmm.
handling surprise, which is an act of courage and possibly it's all tied. Like so much of life is like like in this deeper, beautiful sense is tied to your ability to handle surprise.
Hmm.
That's like I don't want to say 100% of it, but it's a very large percentage of it.
Huge part. Huge, huge part.
So then the question is, what does it mean to make decisions that increase the probability of you being surprised? Because if you make a decision, isn't that the opposite of surprise? Right? Like if I choose
Hmm.
X, I'm not going to be just surprised because I know X. Well, it would mean you're choosing whatever X is that you're choosing
Hmm.
is more like a field of possibility than
Hmm.
an object, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So and that is what's fitting because what's fitting for the human is to be able to handle surprise.
Yes.
And how you handle surprise and what exactly that looks like, no one can say but you in the situation. And that's how you start talking about fittingness without oppression,
Yeah.
without top-down design and
Hmm.
stuff like that. So if you're on a roof and the ladder is not exactly in place, and this might be on a real live example or not, and you kind of look and say, well, I might be able to jump to that and get down. Or I could yell for someone to come to the ladder. What do you do? Do you need someone to come and hold the ladder? Maybe not, right? Maybe you could make it. But then also you judge if I jump down and get hurt, then possibility and creativity is very limited because I'm either dead or I can't walk or there's many things like I will be less in a position for surprising things to occur to me. Because if you're bedridden, surprising things can occur, but the probability of surprising things goes down,
Hmm.
right? There's more surprising things that can occur if you're going through your daily life and things like that. Also, when you call someone to come hold the ladder, here's a key for like, so because there's also a question here like, what's a justified need versus an arbitrary need, right? A justified need can also be tied to one you don't want to admit. You
Hmm.
don't want to acknowledge, I need your help because I did something dumb. I need your help because this is wrong, right? So this is a need you need to acknowledge,
Hmm.
as opposed to a need where you say, "Well, I just need ice cream right now." No, well, you're anger, bitter, and self-righteous. Like, what is your emotions behind the need? Like,
Yeah.
as a kind of
Yeah.
piece of evidence, like a
It's
need that
clear.
is
Yeah.
probably fitting is one that's going to require a bit of humility, or you
Yes.
don't
Facing a
want to
fear.
ask for.
Yeah. Yeah.
The key is a need you probably need to ask for is when you don't want to ask for, right?
Exactly.
Whereas a
Yeah.
need you want to ask for and
That's.
feel bitter and self-righteous, no,
Hmm.
you need to kill that one because that second need based on self-righteousness is cutting off possibility.
Yes.
You're not open to the other person. You're seeing the other as a means to the end of your choosing. So
Yep.
that's not very creative because you've already decided what you've needed.
Yep.
But when you need someone to hold the ladder or to get the ladder because it fell, you're going to die. So there's no creative possibility. You see what I'm saying?
Hmm.
So now this is not this is a gray zone. I'm not saying it's black and white, but at least when you understand what needs open fields of possibility versus what needs are based on what I've decided is the future that is best for me, right? Same goes with want. Like you say, well, I want a new car. That doesn't really open surprising conditions because you already have a car because you can get from A to B to Z. So what's a new, more expensive car going to do? Right? It's not really going to open. It's not going to open a lot of possibility. Maybe some, but not a lot. So you need to make a live gray zone decision on is the amount of possibility this purchase going to make greater than the possibility that would have been there had I just kept the money and been
Yeah.
able to do other things, right?
Right.
So you're asking not what's good or what do I want and I need this. And so you're asking what opens creative possibility. Like if you learn to hunt or learn skills like in the Ivan Illich sense, like enablement, like what are things you can do that open creative possibility? If you say, well, it's good to plant a garden, for example. Well,
Hmm.
is it beautiful though? Because if it's not beautiful to you, then you're probably going to get overwhelmed, tired, be irritable,
Mm,
and stuff like that, right? But yeah, learning how to plant a garden opens creative possibility, but you want to think of it as opening that possibility versus it's good to do because, I don't know, self sustainability is important. Now, self sustainability can be beautiful, but even little subtle distinctions in your
mhm,
main
mhm.
motive can
Yeah.
make all the difference in the world.
Mhm.
Because if you don't believe having a garden is beautiful, then you're under ethics and
Yeah.
morality and obligation, and you're gonna break because
Yeah.
you're not going to work with the tomatoes in a way where you marvel at them.
Yeah.
You're going to work with them in a way that's trying to get through them, right? So you have
Yes.
to ask, what's your motivation? Is it from a sense of the good or the sense of the beautiful? And you apply that to everything. Now, the same goes with conversation. Like if conversation dies, then you're not open to possibility. But let me throw it to you.
No, that's all really good. I don't, were you going to say any
Yeah,
more on that?
please.
Okay. Well, that was all very good. I mean, it just makes me think about how, related back to fittedness is that, yeah, actually having this ability to have it be in line with beauty
Yes.
is what is going to be most fitting for you to actually do the thing that you want to do, right?
Yes.
You say you want to do,
Yes.
right? And I also really liked your point about this idea of like almost the need you are afraid to ask being the one you need to ask, but the
Yes.
one that you just, you know,
Because that one will develop your character. The one you're afraid to ask will develop your character.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah,
courage is like the
courage
key,
is huge. I mean, I was gonna say that when you were talking about surprise. I was gonna say like courage is absolutely fundamental to becoming
central,
fully
central.
human.
So,
Yeah,
oh yeah,
yeah.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
And I think unfortunately a lot of like the technological essence has just again, I mean, this isn't a new
Courage is
concept.
an inconvenience.
Yeah. It's a liability, it's an inconvenience, it's irrational.
It's not, well, yeah, under the technological
Essence
essence,
is
it's
irrational.
irrational,
Yeah.
not non-rational, it's
Yeah. Because
irrational.
there's so many things where it's
Under
like, well, you
beauty,
didn't
it's non-rational as what affords the
yeah,
possibility of new thinking.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's why I was gonna say too, like the non-rational is really huge here. Because just to go back when I was saying about like, oh, that person annoyed me, everything in your rational mind thinks,
Yes,
yes, they bothered me.
yes,
Like they're bothering
yes,
to
and
me. It's
here's
their
the
fault.
evidence as
Right,
one.
right.
Yeah,
But you have to do this non-rational act of contemplating the fact that they did that and
yes,
you have a choice.
yes, yes,
You do. You really
yes,
do.
yes,
You really, really do. And if you want to choose not to, but that's fine. But just realize that is your choice to say you don't have a choice.
yes,
So you are still choosing.
yes,
You
yes,
are still
yes,
choosing.
yes.
Um, but yeah, no, that's all. That's really that's important. And I think it's helpful because I think the needs wants topic is so
Confused.
confused,
It's insanely
so
confused.
confused.
Yes.
And if you don't have fittedness,
If you don't have
yeah,
beauty
I
and
don't.
fittedness, you're done.
Yeah, you're done. Like
Yeah.
there's no way
But
to
no
yeah.
different. Look, it's no different than basically religions, nationalities, national identity without a limit that affords creative possibility. Because you got to have a telos to have identity. You got to have
Yeah.
authority or everything. It's all done. It's all done. Like
Mhm,
without the politics of the beautiful we've talked about. And look, I
mhm,
mean, all we're describing about this limit that opens possibility is getting at Andrew Luber and Alex with theme,
mhm.
where they talk about
Yeah.
what the theme is. So
Yeah.
we're talking about discerning theme also in
Yeah,
a certain
yeah.
sense.
Really quick, I just want to say really fast about what I was talking about incorporating the beautiful in the little moments and talking about play. I do want to be careful to distinguish that from just being a jester in the room
Yes.
because I've heard this from people in the past, like older people who would talk about their own family dynamics when they were a child, about almost feeling like they would
Be the
be the
gesture.
jester for their
Yeah.
parents so
Yeah.
that things would be more
Yes.
lighthearted and it
Yes.
would be
Yes.
better and nicer than
But
the
then you're
parents. But
playing to keep the good because
yeah,
you want for stability, not to open up like creative possibility, which
exactly.
would require confronting the real in Lacanian sense. Like you can't
Yeah,
open creative possibility ignoring the differences or the
mhm,
difficulty. You have to face it. You
yeah.
because you can't open creative possibility without courage. Ultimately,
Yeah. And actually this also speaks to why there's the distraction which can be the playful, but we're talking about a playful that is actually a type of discernment. There's a
yes.
difference
Oh
between
yes.
mere distraction and discernment. You may still have the jovial and the playful,
Yes.
but it's not for the avoidance. It's for the lubrication of the actual substance of that relation and
Well,
that
it's interesting the
conversation,
word
etc.
play also means musical instrument. There's a skillful play,
Yeah, yeah,
right? You know, a conviviality
yeah, yeah.
versus a play that is a kind of mechanism of repression.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah.
Well, I guess although now I know I'm really out of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean all this it like there is a sense in which the question is how do you make a non-rational decision too, right? Like how do you choose a
Mhm.
non-rational need? How do you choose a non-rational one? Because there's something that's being suggested here where if it's not non-rational, you're in trouble. Like, it almost has to
Mhm.
be in the good or it has to be in the true.
Even though you'll feel like you're safe,
Yes, yes.
but really it's the
It's the
inversion.
reverse. Well,
Yeah.
you're safe because 'cause you're in an enclosure. And then that has trouble, right? Like, it's not toward openness. So how do you make a non-rational choice? Because there is a sense in which what else do you make a choice other than what is rational, right? This is why, like, you have to make choices that have an open, like, what makes things open? What is more geometric than algebraic? What is kind of more horizontal? What is more relational
Mm,
versus like a point, right? Because you're trying to think when you're deciding, ask someone for help with the ladder or try to jump onto this wooden thing that maybe I could do it. Like, it looks like I really could. Y- Bringing someone open is an act of relationality. You're showing trust to that person. You're also kind of humbling yourself, which has point. So that's opening up a field, like a field is opening, and you break your life. Like, you want to think through all your needs, wants, and desires as, is this contributing to opening up horizon?
mm,
And the reason you want to open up horizon is because that opens up creativity. But the key to understand is creativity is not this fluffy magical thing. It requires courage. It requires, like, you're
exactly.
creating the condition of facing the Lacanian real. Surprise. So this is not a happy-go-lucky thing we're necessarily saying. You will face yourself if you do this. Creativity is a certain terror, in the
Absolutely.
way God is terrible. In this way, there's a terror to all full, right? So, one of the problems is, like, when you simply choose things in terms of wants, like what you want, that's more on the side of good and the true. In a sense, it's not cosmic enough. It's not
Yeah.
large enough.
Yeah.
It's too
Too
small.
small.
It's not
You don't want
wide
enough.
enough.
You don't want enough, actually.
Yeah, you don't want enough. You don't want to be sent on a quest. You don't want to, like,
Yeah, yeah.
really
Mm,
see the depths of life.
mm,
So one of the things that we're talking about, fittingness. What is fitting is experience that forces a fullness of life. Like, you're going to come upon the fullness of life, which is not all good. It is a journey, like a story is good, bad, horror, challenges. It's all of these dimensionalities together. And there's something about fittingness because also, I guess when you think telos again, you could argue the telos of a seed, of, let's say, an oak seed, is to become a tree because that is what the seed will do left to its own devices. Now, notice though, it requires conditions, it requires water, but there's an innate latency
mm.
in a seed to become this thing. And so then the argument is, well, everything is like that,
Yeah.
right? Now, I think if we use that language of vectors, as Elon would use, it would seem how and notice what the seed, what it is doing is coming into, it's kind of an unfolding of a fullness of life.
Mm,
The seed is a tree, and now it can be shade. There's this kind of growing that occurs, right?
mm,
If we use those vectors from along, it would seem as if in physics, biology, no, chemistry, biology, that telos has more of this, I don't want to say automatism, but there's something in the determination of these things that is more likely to just head in a certain direction, right? Now, fittingness and survival go together, right?
right.
But much more needs to be said on that. But there's something about the human being that their fittedness is not given to them entirely.
Yeah.
And they have to decide
Mhm.
what it is, right? They have to decide what is their fittingness. And
Yeah.
this is why there's always been a concern with the language of telos, because it seems like you're saying this is what is fitting for humans, and you're thus taking from them the
Mm,
decision,
mm,
right? And that's very problematic. And yet
mm.
it also seems problematic when you say, well, nothing is fitting, anything goes, right? Because
Exactly.
then, in the same way, well, wait a minute, there are certain conditions in which a seed grows. And what if, and then the question is, who makes this art? What if there are conditions in which a human grows that without those conditions they won't grow? And if that is the case, which would be a kind of metaphysical claim or a religious claim, then it would be unfitting not to have those conditions.
Mm,
But then the question is this: what are the most open of all possible conditions, of which nevertheless are real conditions, that if a human meets them, there is a higher probability that they live fully,
mm,
like the seed becoming a tree,
mm,
right?
mhm,
It seems to be courage.
mm,
Like, the fitting thing for the human to do is the courageous thing in
mhm,
any and all possible circumstances. And the argument is that basically, uh, probably, there is probably a question of courage that can be asked of every single want, need, desire, like,
mhm,
whatever you have in your life.
mm,
You could probably run it through a filter of courage.
mm,
A heuristic of courage, and then ask about the need, and you could also say any need that will demand courage of you, I want to say you should do. I want to say not just probably you should do, you should do it if it
Mhm.
demands courage of you. Now, the question is, though, what kind of courage? Because then there
Yeah.
could be courage that's just burning everything down and everyone hates you. So I'm so
Yep.
courageous because I
Yep.
burn. It has to open relationality,
Well,
it has to open
it has to
surprise.
be a courage with fittedness.
Yes,
It
and if and the fittedness is creative, and if I have courage
and
and
beauty.
in beauty, and if I have courage to destroy everything, and then everyone hates me, and I'm so courageous because everyone hates me, no, there's no creative now because it's narrow. You've cut off all these sources of the unknown. You've cut off all these sources of surprise. So there's no surprise on the other side of that. So even courage itself
Mm.
is not a virtue unless it is in service of the beautiful.
Yes.
Because then if it's just you're calling it courage because it was
Exactly.
hard,
Yeah.
well then but now you have complete control. You did say it was really
Exactly.
hard, but you burned everything up. So now
Yep.
you have control. There's
Yep.
less surprise. So courage in service of surprise. Well, you could put it this way then. Courage, you run everything, and we're out of time. You run everything through the filter of what courage will create more opportunities for courage.
Mm.
And that are not based on my idea of the good.
Mm.
Because if they're based on your idea of the good, then you may think those people suck, and so I'll get rid of them, and it's courageous to do that. But that's
And now I'm
assuming.
opening possibilities without those people,
Yes, that's
right? I
correct.
mean,
That's correct. But it's
can we always
actually
say they have more? Oh well,
yes,
I'm still opening up possibilities.
yes.
So
But less
so courage.
people, by definition, means less connections with the unknown, thus less possibility than if you're just by yourself. Yeah, there's always going to be things you can't expect, but now it's of lesser quality. And
Yeah.
furthermore, you did that based on an assumption of the good. It's on an assumption of the good
Yeah.
that you've done this thing, right? Now, you may decide that I'm gonna put up boundaries. So let's put it this way. If you've got someone you say, "Well, I need to get away from these people," if you really need to get away from them, it will be really hard. Like, you won't want to do it. Like, it
Mhm.
will demand something of you. But if you're like, "I wanna get away from these people," and you really wanna do it and you're eager to, you probably, well, no, that's self-righteousness and based on your own ethics or whatever, and you need to face them, right? So you really like, all of this is suggesting that the question of fittingness is a lifelong self-examination in a feedback loop with the world to really be paying attention to where the courage is and where your motivations are. And are your motivations based on I'm right, they're wrong,
Mhm.
or certainty or the good or the true. If you are doing that, then this is not as creative as being open to the beautiful. And thus actually will terrorize you less in a certain way. You will have to face less kind of all God terror than you would if you actually maintain open to the beautiful. Like,
Mhm.
that's the other thing when people talk about how yeah, when people talk about how hard X, Y, and Z are, but they're stuck in the register of the good, it is not nearly as hard
No.
as actually operating in the
Oh,
beautiful.
1000%.
But we want to claim the heart because then you're getting the victim card,
Mhm.
or you're getting an identity
Yes.
as a good person who does all of these hard things for
Yes.
other people,
Absolutely.
right? But what's much harder is to make sacrifices and not be identified as making sacrifices, or making
Yeah.
sacrifices of which aren't intelligible to people because they're non-rational, quote unquote, irrational in their eyes, right? This
Or
demands
making
much more of the
sacrifices that
subject.
actually make you look like you're doing something for yourself,
Yes,
something like
that's
that.
correct. And so
Where
all of
you
the
can your self identity has to be relinquished, you know?
absolutely there are well, we talked about with relinquishment. There's something where the only way you really open up creative possibility is to give up control of how people interpret you.
Yeah.
And once you give up how people interpret you, well, then you can actually freely live in such a manner where things can happen to you that have more creative possibility.
Yeah.
But you have to relinquish. I mean,
Mhm.
relinquishing, like, you're not going to get the beautiful without a step of relinquishment.
Mhm.
Relinquishment is where creativity begins, because it's an act of courage.
Yeah. That's all really good. I know we're wrapping up, but I just want to say one really quick thing. I was um David, I think that's his name, a recovering overthinker. He was talking about like how we actually require structure,
Yes,
as creative. Like if you're going to do something creative, like you do have to actually give yourself structure.
yes,
And I was thinking about that and how that is true. I do think that is true. And then the question is, it's fitting for us to have structure because, like you're saying, creativity isn't just this kind of like
no,
it's. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of like
yes.
effort, and again, like letting your self identity go, did all of this stuff. But I was then thinking about it like, oh, okay, then you have but this isn't just a top down thing that absolves your free will, because in that recognition of needing structure as human beings, you then have to create your own structure.
I would say
So then you,
creativity requires conditions.
right. But I'm just thinking, like, in terms of creating the structure itself,
Yes,
that's where you have to almost do this kind of testing on the feedback loops and all that, because it's like, yes, you need structure. And you could get paralyzed. Well, it might be the wrong structure. I don't know what's the right structure. So you
Correct.
just don't do anything.
Yes.
You need to start to then actually like test the fittedness of of different structures
Yes.
to be able to see how you are then able to utilize that structure for your creativity. So,
Yes.
and so I was just thinking about that, where like determining what is fitted for the need, if we can acquiesce to it, that we do need structure, is going to be, again, this is why we keep talking about discernment. It's like this process of testing the waters and
Yes.
discerning,
Yes.
but then being also very responsive to that, so that you can make adjustments as you need to.
You've got to meet. I think sometimes, I guess, it's 100% correct what is being said, that creativity requires structure. The issue can be if you pick a structure that you've outsourced and think that's going to make you creative
Yeah,
inside of it. The structure must arise from you, but that means you must meet the conditions to discern structure that
yeah,
works. So there's a conditioning, like going to
yeah.
the gym, that has to be
And
done.
he had mentioned that too, where you can't just sort of take some, I'm going to meditate at this time and do this, and like,
Yes.
if you, his main thing is the thrust of a project. Like,
Yes.
you need a project. You need
Yes, you
something
do.
that gives you the theme,
You need
right?
something that
Of,
puts a demand on you.
yeah, that puts a demand on you.
Yes.
And don't worry if it's the project of your life, or
No.
if it's the right project. Just make a choice, right? Make a
Yes.
choice, a decision, and then allow that project to determine, to help you determine, I should say, what your structure need ought to be.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
anyways,
No, absolutely. Well, and I guess as
what's the fitting structure,
yeah, what's
Yeah,
the fitting structure?
yeah.
Well, overall, because I think it actually ties to that question, because if we say that basically you need to really highly index courage,
Yes,
but then of course examine what you mean by courage, because you might
yes,
just be
yes,
using that word to refer to permissiveness.
yes.
Um, there's something, if you do that, a kind of structure emerges.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a structure, it's a kind of habit, but
It's a mode.
it's a
So,
mode. It's a kind of structure, but it's a structure of a garden. It is
yeah,
a
it's
structure
also
that
the structure of your physical
yes,
body in
absolutely.
the world.
Absolutely.
Like,
So it's a structure
hmm,
in the same way that a jazz improvisation has an anchor. Someone's playing the anchor or it doesn't work. Well, there's a structure, but that structure is what affords the stuff that grows on top of
yeah,
it. And so yeah, I mean there's a way overall that what is being said is that, because again, we live in a culture that is so confused about so many things. Needs, wants, boundaries, blah blah,
even courage. Yeah,
courage, and so on and so forth. A lot of people ask the question, is it good to have needs? And then everyone will have a go, well, of course needs are good, but sometimes, and you do this kind of bothness thing. We say, well, sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. Well, that just means you're stuck in the dialectic, going
exactly.
back and forth. You need the speculative reason principle.
Yes.
And so basically what's being said is if X if X is necessary for creative possibility in the way that we've meant it, then you need X. And in fact, if you don't do X, then it's kind of in a way very bad. So, to the degree that X is what you need, then that need is holy, and you must voice it and give into that need. So it goes with want, so it goes with desire, so it goes with all of these different things, right? Now, you have to discern if that X is doing that. Like,
If the X
if
is
that
doing,
X is opening creative possibility, if that X is something that if you do, you will be more conditioned to handle surprise and more courageous, right?
what about when somebody's like, "This is really hard for me to tell you."
They
Oh,
have,
this is what, like you said, when you're stuck in the good, you'll say it's so hard and it's so
yes, you
hard.
have to really examine
Yeah, yeah.
yourself.
It,
Just
it
because
takes
it's,
a lot of takes a
yeah,
lot of self examination.
I have not I've not met anyone who makes a point to say how hard something it is to say, who's not in a power position, like they're using
Yeah,
power. It's not a good move.
yeah.
It usually
You're
is not.
potentially
People
emotional.
in the beautiful don't say that. They just show it.
Yeah,
Like it's just like the activity, like when you say it's hard for me or this is really difficult right now, I'm really going through these are all unfortunately game theory dynamics in conversation
certainly
that can
can be.
they
Certainly
can
can
be
be. Yeah,
that can break it down. Not
yeah.
necessarily. But really, all of those phrases, you run through the filter
Yeah.
of courage or not. Is it more courageous to say this is hard for me or less?
Hmm.
If verbalizing this is hard for me actually requires less courage than not, then you shouldn't verbalize it because it demands more courage. And often too, when you say this is hard for me, you're afraid that the person you're talking to doesn't realize how hard it is for
For
you,
you.
or you're afraid that they're going to think you're just being a bully.
Yep.
So if you're suffering, then you're not a bully,
Yeah.
right? And so, or something like
It's a
that.
preservation of the self image there.
Yeah, that's correct. And so that gets into where actually it would be more courageous not to say that and not have as much control
And trust.
and
Trust
trust
the
and
other
trust
person.
that trust. Well, do you trust that what you're saying is indeed enabling the beautiful? Because
Exactly.
if it is, then it will, and you
Yeah.
don't have to say it will,
And it doesn't
right?
matter if it was hard or easy for you to say.
Yeah, it doesn't
It's
matter.
it's
If it was easy to say and enables the beautiful, it's better than a hard thing to say that doesn't.
exactly.
So difficulty doesn't necessitate anything,
Mhm.
only to the degree it affords creative possibility.
Absolutely.
But basically, all one's desires, all of these things can be run through those questions.
Mm.
And if you're asking, is this want good or bad? Is this need justified or not? Is this a good desire, a holy desire, or a bad desire? Run it through the filter of this conversation.
Yeah.
And
Through the
and
courage, through the beauty.
yes, and opening creative possibility,
Mhm.
opening a field versus
Yeah, fields
is it
versus
opening a field and a horizon, or is it just arriving at a point?
yes.
Is this thing just going to be a point you arrive at, or is it going to open up a vista?
Mhm.
If it's just a point, it's probably not good. If it opens up a vista, then you need to do it.
Mhm.
Like it's a need you need,
Mhm.
in that
Mhm.
sense. So all of those topics, which I just think, and I mean, you could run, humility, when are you being passive versus humble, all of these ethical, like the entire gambit of ethical questions, which you could argue all of these are ethical questions. You run it through the filter of this conversation and re-examine it.
Mhm.
If you do not do that, you will be, in my opinion, forever confused about
Yeah,
needs and wants and
absolutely.
desires and fear, all the stuff we talked about. Like you'll be forever confused.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, most many families, many relationships, many organizations, many communities are just forever caught in the maelstrom of that confusion,
Yes.
and they just are perpetually hurting one another
Yeah.
constantly in that maelstrom, and so then everyone becomes a hickam. Of course they do. You have this crisis of family estrangement now where
Mhm.
children aren't interacting with their parents at all. Well, yeah, it's just this maelstrom of confusion.
Mhm.
So it is very important to overcome that. But
Yes.
I must run. So
Yes.
before we're late, but for more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter,
Yep.
Anchor, not Anchor, Spotify,
Yeah.
Amazon. All purchases
Amazon.
of books, reviews are
Yeah.
really big deal.
Big deal.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.